So when you're developing your applications, Android does a remarkably good job of actually making sure that it runs well across a whole host of different devices. But when it comes to different screen sizes and screen densities, you want to be familiar with these concepts because there are things you can do in your application to help to make things as smooth as possible. So let's look at some of the concepts surrounding this. The first is screen size, and this is simply the physical size of your screen. So if you start in the lower left-hand corner, measure to the upper right-hand corner, that is the screen size. Screen density is simply if you take an inch of your screen, how many pixels actually make up that inch. And obviously the higher the number, the higher the resolution and the better it looks. And this is often known as DPI, or dots per inch, or in this case, PPI, pixels per inch. Android has a concept of a density-independent pixel. This is a virtual pixel unit that you should use when defining your UI layout. And this is based on a 160 DPI screen. And when you use this density-independent pixel, the Android system will automatically change the size of these objects so that they look the same on different devices. Seeing as though there's such a huge number of different Android devices out there with different sizes and densities, Android has actually broken things up into generalized sizes and densities. So when we're talking about the size of screens, Android has broken it up into 4 generalized sizes: small, normal, large, and extra large. Of course, extra large being what you find on most tablets. And in a similar fashion, there's a set of 4 generalized densities: LDPI for low DPI, MDPI for medium, high DPI, and XHDPI. And when you're developing your application, you're only dealing with these 4 generalized sizes and densities. These generalized categories actually do map to real-world sizes and densities. So here we can see the generalized small size is between 2 and 4 inches. If we go all the way up to extra large, it's between 7 and 10 inches, which is our tablet devices. When we look at densities, low DPI is actually between 100 and 200, and again at the upper end of the scale. High DPI, extra high DPI devices are up above 300. So how do we deal with these in our application? Well, we can actually provide resources that are specific to different screen sizes and different densities. And we've already looked at that a couple of times in this course, but we can see that when we're providing resources, we can actually put a certain qualifier, append it to the end of our directory names, and then based on the type of device the user is running your application on, Android will actually go and pick out those specific assets based on the screen size, the density, as well as the orientation. So are they viewing this in landscape or portrait? And then also the aspect ratio. And here's just an example of how this might look. So we can see we have our resources folder, and then we have our layout folder. Now the layout folder without any type of qualifier is going to be used if there are no other specific folders. Here we can see we have a layout small folder, a layout large folder, and the resource that's used is obviously going to be dependent on the user's device. And in the same fashion here for our drawable directory, we have a drawable MDPI, HDPI, and XHDPI folder. And again, Android is going to use whichever one is appropriate for the user's device. So what are the best practices for screen independence, which is basically making your application so that it's going to run as best as it can across a wide range of different devices? So first is the type of units that you use when creating your layouts. You're going to want to either use wrap content, fill parent, or device independent pixel units when specifying dimensions. Now, as a side note for this, for text, you should use scale-independent pixels. But using these units are kind of the ultimate way of making sure your application is going to look the same across all these different device types. And number 2 is basically similar in vein to number 1, is that you don't want to use hard-coded pixel values in your code. Again, if you need to provide a specific width and height, you should be using density-independent pixels. For number 3, there is a layout container called Absolute Layout, but it's deprecated and it's definitely not recommended to use because it relies on specific pixel coordinates for positioning elements. And that's, like I mentioned, exactly what you don't want to do in Android, because while it might look right on the device that you're using for development, it's going to look drastically different on somebody else's device with a different screen size and DPI. And lastly, it's best to provide alternate bitmap drawables for different screen densities. So we've looked at that already with creating our application icon. We can provide a different version of that icon for smaller screen sizes and densities. The Android system will automatically create those versions for you if you don't provide them, but specifically for things like icons, when you get to a really small icon size, you may actually want to change the design or tweak some specific properties to make it look better on smaller devices. So with these concepts in mind, you can make sure that your application is going to look as best it can on all of the different Android devices that are out there.